Hi, my name is Tim Carter, and this video is another application noticing the dialectic as it's applied in a diabolical manner. And before I move on, this is my high school ministry shirt from East Union. I went to the youth revival at East Union Missionary Baptist Church last night. They don't take a debit card, so I owe them $10 for this shirt. But shout out for them trusting me to assure that those $10 make it back. But let's remember, sometimes someone has an agenda, and in this example it'd be a negative agenda. So they set up a thesis, antithesis, and then the synthesis. Now the synthesis is it's another one of a different kind. For example, things that are in harmony, already ordered and arranged, such as the scriptures, are already synthetic. Someone comes along, deconstructs it, develops a contradiction. We covered several of them. This one's an interesting one because it came up in our church in 1996, 95. I was teaching a class and the topic of Freemasonry. I began a 3-part series on that. It was strange, the almost irrational responses we were having. One person began to defend something that wasn't being attacked because he was primed and conditioned and supposed that it was an opportunity for him to plant his flag of significance somewhere. And then another was really impressed with what they were learning. So I noticed how strange it was, such a mixture. Well, then I learned that that was about the time where a lot of things were coming out where people were beginning to demonize Freemasonry. And let me just say, that was their agenda. Let's say the agenda is to demonize Freemasonry. And so you set up a thesis, and you say there's a conflict between Masonry and Christianity, for example. So you come over, and the antithesis is this fraternal organization here is now Christian or demonic. You say, well, that's quite extreme. Well, yes, it is, but notice the synthesis of a different kind, what happens. First of all, the history of Freemasonry and its adversarial relationship with the universal religion. Universal religion said, we don't want the knowledge that is proprietary, that was being cared for by this group called Masons, Freemasonry. Today, the history of education, for example, the alliance with education, our society and government, is now negated. Matter of fact, when you received your degree at the seminary, for example, the Missionary Baptist Seminary, if you had worn a hat, for example, the little square board is called a mortar board, and the idea of degrees that are conferred in educational institutions come from Masonry. So really, in one way, the knowledge that was cared for and so abundantly available today is now dispensed among society. And also the ignorance that is a mortar board that we're wearing on our heads, the ignorance of the degree system, the ignorance of what guarded some of this proprietary information that allows for successful degrees in engineering, all fields of science, architecture, things like that. Well, it also, this trying to demonize it, making it, is it Christianized or demonized, and taking this fraternal organization, will also cause ignorance of operative and speculative Masonry. Operative Masonry is somewhat like operative Christianity. Ironically, just in the last day or two, a large dispute has arisen in the media over one political party indicating through correspondence, electronic correspondence, emails, their disdain for people who would be considered operative in their faith, that is, to live out according to it. And they saw value in exploiting, let's say, a religion for a social purpose and advantage, but not to live it out because it would contradict their political agenda. It's similar to what happens in churches today. I know that the most disappointing thing for religious people who came into our congregation was when they found out that we who had agreed together, that is, we who were called out, that is, we had believed the gospel, were blood bought, called out, baptized, had agreed together for the purpose of carrying out the Great Commission, was to be observing always all things whatsoever Jesus commanded us. It struck them and really startled them that we had the integrity to keep the covenant and not go along with what they were doing. So that would mean that we were operative Christians. Speculative Masonry, however, seems to be what people are failing to distinguish from operative. Operative were vocational, educational, and professional people who joined together for the purpose of advancing. Similar to the people who founded the Missionary Baptist Seminary, they were operative Masons. And to demonize all Masonry was perhaps is typical of people who fall for the dialectic, that somehow all these benefits in our nation, the framers of our Constitution, the political scientists that they were, the brilliance of being stewards over technology, our entire educational system, and on a person can learn. But whatever speculative Masonry is, I think that's where it becomes theosophic, philosophic, and even politico-religious. And I think that would be where people are supposing that somehow one of the functions of the Masonic system or order was to somehow assure doctrinal integrity. That really wouldn't fit their function. The fraternal idea had to do with men coming together, meeting their obligation as citizens, and defying at one time in the ancient history the threats and intimidations by the universal religion that threatened people with dispensing knowledge among the people. Because it's very frustrating even today on clergy. Clergy can sometimes be very intimidated if their laity, their word, which is a Koine Greek word from laos, people, if their laity get ahead of them, it really hurts clergy. They discourage it, they ridicule it, the advancement of knowledge, education, degrees. But now independent called out bodies known as churches that are not state affiliated, that is part of a state sponsorship, such as a Church of Rome, Church of England type state religion. Especially in this country, we have no Church of the United States. Well, we encourage the acquisition of knowledge, the acquisition of degrees. We admire excellence, and that flies in the face of the universal religion and the, let's say, disappointing attitude clergy have toward advancements of knowledge. So the idea that it's a demonic or a Masonic lodge is just really disappointing, because the history of our nation, the history of Freemasonry's role and function is lost. The distinction between operative and speculative is never made. And then the history that the Freemasonry that people today are trying to demonize was actually already demonized by the very religion, the universal religion, that was responsible for persecuting people who came here to avoid that. We've never really been persecuted by Freemasonry. So anyway, this is it. This is just an example of what can happen and what can be lost. So if you've ever wondered about Freemasonry, stop for a minute when you hear someone speak of a fraternal organization and people go too far to try to Christianize it, which is really well intended perhaps, but it's really pointless. It has no aim or purpose that would enhance the fraternal organization. It's neutral on that. But then people come along and try to demonize it and then don't distinguish. Speculative Masonry really is an open door to just about anything. A person says yes, but they have to acknowledge belief in one God. Okay, but that's really the extent of it. There is no other filter, no screening. There is no imposition on people that enter into it in a fraternal capacity. So that's enough. That's just an example of why we can't study subjects, for example, Freemasonry, because the dialectic charges people emotionally and people think they're doing a good deed, are well intended, and they outburst, they outlandishly accuse and say terrible things. But that's enough to give you an example of that. So enjoy that study. Is it a demonic or a Masonic lodge? And of course, knowing what we know in the context of composure, we can enjoy studying any subject, and we don't have to be careful about it. So enjoy your study.